everybody, and welcome back to Yellow Brick Road Rash, where the road to awakening is full of adventure, but it just might hurt. I'm your host, Jewel, here to guide you along the path of individuation and awakening by using the story of Dorothy on the Yellow Brick Road as an allegory for the journey. If this is your first time here, please go back and listen to the first episodes. Like Dorothy's journey, the stops down our path are sequential in nature, and it might make it easier for you to understand where we are if you'll start at the very beginning. I gotta say, writing this episode has been very difficult for me. I had something happen to me recently, and it's shaken the very ground I stand on. And I feel pretty flummoxed about it, so I'm going to share it with you today. The truth is, like the Yellow Brick Road, the road to recovery is not a straight line, the road to individuation is not a straight line, and certainly the road to awakening isn't either. But because I feel like I've done so much work to get where I am today, it really caught me off guard that I wasn't more prepared when faced with my own crisis. For quite a few years now, I've been working on this consciousness journey. I've learned so much, I've gained an understanding of myself and our universe, and framed a version of reality I feel comfortable with that is deeply spiritual, but also backed by science, and it really makes just a lot of sense to me. But I've been telling myself I'm not afraid of death. Well, that's total bogosity, as I quickly learned when my brainstem kicked me into fight, flight, freeze mode. We can learn so much. We can gain vast expanses of spiritual awareness, and we can do all the things. But only those with a regular meditative practice can really step up next to the edge, look fear straight in the eyes, and say they aren't afraid. I thought I was prepared, but my lack of meditative discipline proved to be a barrier to staying calm when the stakes were high. I'm really not trying to be discouraging, just transparent. Seeking awakening isn't easy, but it will be the best thing you or I will ever do. Yellow Brick Road Rash is just here to keep you moving forward without getting too skinned up at the same time. Folks, I am far from having any kind of answers. So again, just to be transparent, when I'm saying I'm learning along with you, I really am. Anyway, I had neck surgery recently. I was told it would be a short but fairly intense initial recovery and then get pretty easy after maybe 2 weeks. I always heal really fast from surgery, so I went into it pretty open-minded about success. But I let my guard down and I made some mistakes that included not utilizing the skills that I had learned for meditation and focus for times exactly like these when they're needed. So the surgery went great. I had been home for a couple of days and I had some swelling in my neck that was superficial but became very uncomfortable. Because I was on medication, I wasn't really myself and I wasn't scrutinizing my own behavior and choices I was making to deal with the discomfort. It didn't hurt, it just felt like pressure on my throat, but I have to say I pretty much flipped out. I felt kind of like a wild animal who had been caged. I felt like I was strangling. I let this sink in too deep, and this is pretty unlike me. My husband ran me to the ER in our little town, and they gave me some medication to calm me and some fluids via IV, and before long I was feeling better. However, I then began having altered states of awareness. As it turns out, visions and hallucinations are fairly common with this particular medication. Over the course of the next maybe 12 hours, hallucinations and nightmares actually became part of my post-op experience. I will say, I never have nightmares and I don't care very much for them. But because I have done this much work, as discombobulating as it was, I was able to objectively look at what was happening and accept that it was happening, while doing what I could to be an active observer of it. Before I go on, here are a couple of definitions for what they're worth. Hallucinogens and psychedelics are both types of drugs that can cause altered mental states and visual effects. Hallucinogens, on the one hand, can cause visual alterations that are seen when the eyes are open or closed. But when the eyes are open, the visual effects are layered over the physical environment. And when the eyes are closed, they are seen in the inner world behind the eyelids. The effects can become more complex with higher dosages and when the eyes are closed. But usually, people can still tell the difference between what's reality and what's internally generated. These states are usually entered into involuntarily and therefore are seen as objective phenomena. Or are they? Psychedelics are a subclass of hallucinogenic drugs. Their main effect is to trigger non-ordinary mental states and a perceived expansion of consciousness. I would argue there is no separate sense of whether it is real or not. It is a paradigm-shifting experience which presents itself as unequivocally true. Easy for me to say. Altered states are freaking scary if you're not asking to have one, I can tell you. I mean, if you decide to take a psychedelic and then you start seeing things because you made that choice, that's one thing. But man, I was thrust into an experience that left me shaken. I don't think anything of what I saw in particular was even that scary. It was just the involuntary nature of it all. The hallucinations are a well-documented side effect of this medication, but no one runs down the list of side effects when you're in the ER. So what did I see? As a visual artist, it doesn't surprise me that I was flooded with images, but mainly what I recall was chaos, dark chaos. I was somewhere internal, deep down, but it felt like someone else was in my space along with me. Another entity, or really another essence, if you will. Not a bad one, and not a good one, just something else. I don't even know why I was surprised by its presence, because I believe wholeheartedly in the idea of a daimon, or an angel, personal connection to God, or your conscious agent that exists somewhere deep inside of us. But it was almost like my soul or my daimon didn't expect me to be there in that observational space either. It was like two nerve endings that had been severed and were trying to reconnect so that all the signals could start flowing again in both directions. I know that sounds crazy, but seriously, this is how it felt. I kept hearing, "I lost my tether." We will talk more about the idea of the daimon in a little bit, and maybe some of you will get that Star Trek reference. What I remember is pretty vague, but I did see a male face. But I also see male faces in my meditations. They all continuously morph. And I always just assume this is my animus, another term we will discuss later. This time was no different. Aside from that, really, it had a very temporary, tenuous feel to the experience. Is that because I've done so much reading and this is the story I've begun to tell myself about what reality is? Sure, it could totally be influenced by that. But I felt like I was being slapped in the face with my own story because I needed to reckon with it. And I have been trying to process it fully since it happened. While still in this space, I was also seeing these crazy, shimmering, iridescent, and metallic colors, particularly in pink and gold. It was like a fine iridescent mica sprinkled all over everything, and you could run your fingers across it, and it was the smoothest, most beautiful material I had ever felt, much like how you would assume powdered 24-karat gold would feel. I felt the colors were special somehow, and the message I'd come away with speaks to something about alchemy. My world felt very upside down, but those colors were beautiful and somehow felt grounding. I'm just now realizing I saw pink and gold. The gold's pretty obvious, but the Yellow Brick Road in Munchkinland, where they first started off, was paired with a pink brick in the spiral. And I just think those two colors, I've used them in my branding. They are about me coming back home, Coming back to the Yellow Brick Road Rash and the work that I have to do, the balance that I need to create for myself while I'm doing it. Here I am. Some time has passed since this happened. I'm feeling better. Not only has my body been working its healing magic, but I have reconnected to my tether and finally feel balanced. Is that a thing though? I don't know. Anyway, it became really hard to write this episode without addressing what happened. It feels important to me to share. Why is it important? Because the road to awakening just isn't going to be straight. And if I'm right, it's actually those places where you get held up or thrown off course that are transformative. When Dorothy starts on her trip down the Yellow Brick Road, she has her own uncertainty and fear, but so does each new character she meets. They each have their own issues, their own reasons for needing the wizard, and ultimately, their needs seem to end up taking the stage front and center, appearing to thereby delay Dorothy's quest with each friend added to the journey. But the truth is, Dorothy never let that affect her goals. She didn't let the delays derail her. Instead, she alchemized their needs on the journey into something beneficial, something that became more than the sum of their parts. Her road to individuation wasn't at the exclusion of community. It was because of her ability to be an independent person amidst a co-creating community. And if you remember, that was part of the definition of individuation I discussed in an earlier episode. Together, they were able to accomplish things along that perilous path that any single one of them may not have had the strength to do alone. Basically, folks, we need each other. I just love that phrase. We are more than the sum of our parts. Maybe every time we successfully process information by integrating it into our awareness, which is literally every second of every day, we are actually adding more to the basket of who we are, thereby exceeding our sum total. Okay, let's go over some definitions and get back to how this all ties into the story. Before my medical crisis, I had been working on the podcast and wanted to talk about Jung's cosmology of archetypes, but I wasn't sure if the time was right. But now, in the aftermath of what I went through, I do think it's time to go into a little bit of depth. So what are archetypes anyway? Carl Jung's archetypes are universal symbols or patterns that are present in the collective unconscious of all humans. They are innate and they shape our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Jung believed that by understanding these archetypes, we could gain insight into the human psyche and better understand ourselves and others. But what is the psyche, or the soul, according to Jungian philosophy? It's not your brain. It is whatever it is that generates your original thoughts and emotions. It communicates via these symbolic archetypes. Jungian basic archetypes include the persona, the shadow, the anima animus, the self, and the hero. There are an infinite amount of archetypes that emerge as symbols in response to our experiences, though. But here's a breakdown of those most basic types. The persona is the mask we wear in social situations, who we appear to be, while the shadow represents our repressed or hidden aspects. The anima and animus are very interesting, and they represent the feminine and masculine perspectives of our psyche, while the self is the true, integrated, and balanced self. The hero is the archetype of the journey and represents the struggle and transformation that we go through in life. The bottom line is that these archetypes or symbols are patterns recognizable by the brain. And that goes back to the idea of patterns and why we are so attuned to them. See my past episodes. But it is important to state here that the idea of archetypes is just a way of illustrating a fundamental concept of what is actually happening. It is a way to explain ourselves, much like a symbol or a logo represents a company but isn't a company. The thing is, though, that we are so complex. Each one of us is made of or has access to an infinite number of logos that describe our deepest thoughts and feelings. Remember, like I said before, the map is not the territory, just like the menu is not the food. Same idea. Okay, so what does this have to do with Dorothy? I think the movie is telling the story of how Dorothy is confronting and alchemizing the needs and demands of her own archetypes. I think all of the characters represent archetypes deep in her unconscious that she is having to reconcile and create balance with. You see, it's when an archetype is out of balance that we struggle. For instance, I think we all have that little ugly and disagreeable voice that whispers into our ears dramatic, highly critical nonsense throughout the day. I mean, I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one that has this, right? That voice would be coming from the shadow archetype, in my interpretation. It is the part of our unconscious mind that Jung believed to hold all the things about ourselves that we repress, whether because they're evil, socially unacceptable, harmful to others, or detrimental to our own health. I have begun to think of the bad witches as the shadow. I mean, can we have two? Well, I had a breakthrough when I saw the movie Inside Out 2 with my granddaughter recently. Wow, what a great movie. Entertaining, but also so deep. It's a great shout out to archetypal psychology. In the Pixar movie, the main character is going through puberty and experiences a changing of the guard in terms of her internal archetypes. These fundamental symbols that represent our basic beliefs. As she enters puberty, she needs a new set of symbols or archetypes to help her make sense of the world she is now living in. I think the existence of the two wicked witches in Wizard of Oz, are essentially the same as reflected in the Pixar story. Dorothy gained control over the first witch, who was her first shadow, the one that was with her in her childish years. Remember Miss Gulch? Only to be given a new witch to deal with in her adolescent years, one who was a formidable match to her evolution. You can't really kill your shadow, I don't think. That wouldn't likely be healthy even if you could. However, you can alchemize, synthesize, meld, or integrate your shadow so it can be accepted and addressed when it gets out of balance. That's where the value in the archetypes lie. They help us recognize where we are out of balance by identifying what archetype is trying to communicate with us most. When shadow is overexpressing, we get in deep negative emotional space, but acknowledging the shadow's existence allows one to communicate with it and calm it down. There is just so much more to it, but that, I think, is what shadow work is. Maybe the Wicked Witch taunting Dorothy along the way is the shadow showing Dorothy that there is no getting rid of her. In the end, all you can do is meld or melt her into submission. Interesting. There is a lot to unpack on this subject of archetypes, and we will be peeling the layers away over the course of this podcast. But if my assumptions are true, then let me rephrase. Each character Dorothy comes across are actually parts of herself she is trying to reconcile or alchemize on her journey. And guess what? This is what we are all doing every day of our lives, alchemizing. Okay, I want to talk about two more terms. Anima, Animus. Carl Jung described the Animus as the unconscious masculine side of a woman and the Anima as the unconscious feminine side of a man. The Anima and Animus are the two primary anthropomorphic archetypes of the unconscious. Jung believed that the Anima and the Animus manifest themselves by appearing in dreams and influence a person's attitudes and interactions with the opposite sex. When a woman forms a relationship with a man, Whether it is a friendship or a potential mate, she subconsciously sees and reacts to the man juxtaposed to her animus. All right, another turn. Daimon. Might bracket here. This is from the Jungian Center, and there will be a link to this in the show notes. The daimon is the energy or being in the universe that gives us our fate or allots human destiny. The Romans took up the term, which became the source of our English derivative demon. But note that in the original meaning, the sense in which Jung used it, daimon is not the negative thing we associate with demons. As Jung used the term, daimon referred to something sort of alien from the unconscious, an archetype or numinous imperative which from ancient times has been accorded a far higher authority than the human intellect. As an archetype, the daimon is universal, something experienced in all peoples and all cultures. Because it is autonomous, it behaves within us, making demands of us and acting with authority. The poet and potter M.C. Richards describes the experience of the daimon well when she says, "There lives a creative being inside all of us, and we must get out of its way, for it will give us no peace unless we do." When we say the daimon is autonomous, we mean that it is not under the control of the ego consciousness. It is superior to our ordinary consciousness and possesses us without our conscious awareness. Its expression cannot be consciously willed, and the more our unconscious is split off from consciousness, the larger and more powerful the daimon is. That means it should be our life goal to alchemize the daimon's needs into our conscious existence. How we do this is a part of our discussion here. The existence of a daimon is a topic we will build on over the course of the journey. It is actually at the crux of the journey home. The daimon shows up in life as certain feeling states with a release of effect. That is, we feel something, usually something pretty powerful, something with numinosity, an energy that can't be explained. It can seem like we are being taken over because the level of intensity and energy exceeds our normal human limits. We are in its grip. The daimon will make us feel like we are caught up in a force or process that's carrying us along. And so it requires courage to deal with it because we don't fully understand this force or know where we are being carried or what we are being led to undertake. Nor do we often recognize this force as something that is our own. I find this really interesting, to be honest, and very inspiring. I mean, it makes sense to me, and far bigger brains have based their life's work on these ideas, so it's a place where I feel comfortable hanging my hat, for now anyway. I certainly am familiar with the craving to create, for example. When I'm creating, I get into a flow where all the rest of the world melts away and time warps. After writing this podcast, for instance, I can look up and realize that hours and hours have passed. I haven't eaten, I haven't gotten up to go to the bathroom, I haven't even had anything to drink. When I am in this space, I think this must be what being in flow is. I'm aligned with the wishes of my daimon in that moment. I'm not worrying about my kids, my car not running well, or whether or not I can pay next month's bills. I'm just at peace in my focus. Listeners, I challenge you to think about your own flow. What makes you lose time because you become so focused? I would really love to hear about your experiences through comments below or through your Patreon membership. I have come to believe that is where we should each be as much as is humanly possible every day. I believe in that flow. Our bodies can heal while our minds are set free of our burdens. I found and recognized this piece for the first time when I began experimenting with paint pouring. Since then, I have found other modes of creative flow that completely absorb me and allow me to enter this place of focused calm. I've enjoyed teaching paint pouring too, hoping to provide a skill for others to use to de-stress. And I'm currently being certified to coach Neurographica because it is an incredible method for stress-free creative self-analysis. And although it requires stepping out of my comfort zone, coaching others to feel flow has been life-changing. For more information, check the show notes. Okay, so apparently there are two aspects of the Daimon, just like there are two opposing aspects of all the archetypes. In its positive aspect, the Daimon is our guardian angel, or genius, or maybe we can call her Glinda, our better self or inner voice. It's the part of us that helps build our strength by leading us in challenging situations and giving us the guidance to get through them. The Daimon fosters a dialogue between ego and unconscious, which can heal us and make us whole. By challenging the whole of our being, the Daimon forces us to enter the fray of life with every function or ability we have, and this fosters our wholeness. It is the contact with our Daimon that gives us a clear sense of our vocation. Jung also noted the close connection between the Daimon and creativity. He said, "The fight against the paralyzing grip of the unconscious calls forth man's creative powers." We can see Dorothy's relationship to Glinda reflected in that paragraph, right? I can also see more clearly why Glinda didn't just give Dorothy the answer of how to get home right at the beginning of Dorothy's experience in Oz. The negative side of the Daimon explains the English derivation of the word demon. It's that within us that forces us to impose suffering on ourselves. The devil made me do it, we say. The negative side of the Daimon will drive us into untrodden regions and create conflicts between our outer life and inner demands. When this side of the Daimon shows up, it often seems unwelcome and intrusive. It's a source of discomfort, something that you kind of just have to endure. If we could, we would ignore it, but it is ineluctable. That is, it is that which must be obeyed. Okay, so bracket here. So I'm seeing a tie here to the witches. I have named them Shadow A and B, but are they? Or is one of them actually this negative aspect of Daimon? The problem I see is that the negative aspect of the Daimon is still a positive driving force, even if it feels negative. It's like your mom badgering you to do your homework. It is unpleasant, but actually good for you. Was the Wicked Witch that type of instrument of the Daimon? Witch 2 was justifiably angry at Dorothy for killing her sister and taking the shoes. She allowed Dorothy the chance to make things right, but when the shoes wouldn't come off, she was forced to try to get them by any means necessary. I'm going to have to continue chewing on this. Does the Wicked Witch represent the negative aspect of the Daimon, or is she Dorothy's new shadow archetype? Let me know what you think through our Discord server. You can access that through Patreon membership. Just a little bit more about this. C.G. Jung often expressed a sorrowful outlook on his own daimonic influence, which he likened to captivity for its demands of him, required great sacrifice. Of course, we might expect this from such a prolific creative. Something was driving him, right? At the same time, he acknowledged the extraordinary power of the Daimon in relation to creativity and the fulfillment of our purpose, stating that the only meaningful life is a life that strives for the individual realization, absolute and unconditional, of its own particular law. To the extent that a man is untrue to the law of his being, he has failed to realize his own life's meaning. Y'all, it's all about finding your life's purpose, finding that thing that puts you in flow. The way I see it, the negative aspect of the Daimon will nag at you until it gets what it wants. Clearly, that is witch number 2. And if we consider Jung's own analysis of the Daimon as a captor, we can clearly see Dorothy imprisoned in the witch's castle as the witch prepares to elevate the crisis between her and Dorothy by threatening to kill her and her dog Toto too. We can think metaphorically here and conclude Dorothy's pending death as a metaphor for the sacrifice necessary for enlightenment. There's so much more to ponder, but let's move on. So, bringing this back around, I'm going to say the Daimon, or Glinda in this case, is Dorothy's guiding force, or Daimon. With these definitions under our belt, let's return to Oz. In a nutshell, now I'm going to try to assign the main characters in the movie their own archetypal designations, and I'm going to do that by using the tarot. Again, bracket, bracket. I don't really know what the tarot means to other people who use it. To me, it is a reflection of our archetypes and a way for us to listen to our deepest unconscious self, that which is connected to God or Source. It helps us frame stories so we can analyze how we relate to ourselves and to others in this world. But I don't see it as or use it as a tool for divination, fortune telling. The original purpose of tarot cards was simply as a game. Now, I think it's appropriate to mention that using the cards for divination isn't really that suspicious or evil if you look at the images as a template for storytelling. If you have someone skilled actually reading your cards for you, then all they are doing is creating a story about the cards that you may identify with, whether that's something currently happening or something in the future. It does take a certain level of openness to the reading by the person posing the query, and the reader should understand at least the basic concepts of the Jungian archetypes. But the way I see it, it isn't magic. The characters on the cards are so fundamental to every one of us that you can easily see how, even if someone else is reading the cards to you, they are still just seeing the symbols as archetypes. And you're still only hearing the story through your own personal perspective and drawing from it what you need to hear. Now, do I think divination or magic itself is real? I'm not sure, but we aren't really interested in that as far as this current analysis is concerned. So, in my book, tarot cards are not evil. Tarot cards themselves are not divination tools, in my humble opinion, especially if you are reading the cards for yourself. You are self-analyzing, listening to your psyche through your daimon and archetypes. That the characters on the cards are no different than the ones you would use if you were asked to make up a story for a creative writing class. They're like prompts. Here's another way to look at the tarot. We all think it's pretty cool to do dream interpretation, don't we? Well, in dream interpretation, we are taking symbols from our dreams and putting meaning on them. The same thing as using the tarot. As a sidebar, I'd like to introduce you to a book called Inner Work by Dr. Robert Johnson. In this book, he describes a fantastic 4-step mechanism for interpreting your own dreams using Jungian psychology. But I'm going to take it a step further and tell you about something else he goes over called active imagination. Active imagination is like dreaming in that you are interpreting the meaning of the characters using the same 4 steps from his book. However, the story you are telling is dreamed up consciously while you're awake. So it's an imaginative exercise that leads to the same type of interpretation. Now, how does that work? Basically, Jungian psychologists believe that it doesn't matter whether you're awake or you're asleep. They're both dream states. And that's the stories we tell ourselves in our waking state aren't that different than the stories we recall from our dreams. But either way, it's about the stories themselves. This is important to our discussion because at the end of the movie, Dorothy is struggling to make sense of whether or not her experience had been real. Her family and friends were telling her that it wasn't, but it was very real to her as she was having the experience in the end. Either way, it didn't matter. Dorothy was a changed person because of that experience, regardless of the fact that it came from a dream. And this brings me back around to people who have had paranormal experiences. It really doesn't matter whether or not it was real, and I'm going to say real with quotes. To them, the experience was life-changing, but it's the ontological shock as a result of the experience that puts Dorothy as well as UAP experiencers in the position of having to start reconciling that experience into their life in a meaningful way, and that brings us back around to the word alchemy, turning everything into gold. The tarot is nothing more than an alchemical script that one can use to create their own active imagination story that can then be analyzed using Dr. Johnson's technique. I also think that this is exactly what is happening in a Dungeons and Dragons game. You're role-playing and you're making up your own character. It is a mechanism of storytelling that reveals deep parts of you and the way you see the world. As I go through the movie and analyze the characters, I am essentially doing the same thing, using them as archetypes that we all recognize because they are so fundamental to us as human beings, as is evidenced by how popular that movie still is today. I'm not going to form any hardcore judgments about Baum making any associations with the tarot, but since Dorothy matches the Fool card so well, I can't help myself but try to tie the rest of the characters in. Remember, I am essentially sharing my story with you. You can make your own rules for the game. But on face value, this is the way I see it. Keep in mind that each of the 3 characters that she came across on the road actually already possessed the things they believed they were lacking. But whereas they thought it took an outside influence, they actually just needed to look inward to see it. Even Dorothy was clueless about her own full potential until the very end when Glinda told her she had the tools necessary to go home all along. I would argue how she had just been so focused on her friend's needs, she didn't even have time to think about herself. Typical female archetype, the nurturer. But if all the characters are still part of Dorothy, then so is the wizard, and so is Glinda. We've already established that Glinda could be Dorothy's Daimon. So, who is the wizard? Well, he is the magician in both tarot and archetypal psychology. Card 1. The magician archetype can play multiple roles in a story, such as mentor, guide, or catalyst for transformation and growth. Their wisdom and skills often assist other characters in reaching their full potential. But in the story, wasn't he also a trickster? I think the trickster is the shadow side of the magician. In the movie, Professor Marvel claimed to be a fortune teller, and he did seem to care about Dorothy's well-being, as illustrated by redirecting her intentions to run away to actually going back home to her family. So maybe he is the magician here. But clearly, that character transmutes into the Wizard of Oz, who plays more of a trickster role when it comes to granting Dorothy and her friends their wishes. The trickster is adept at withholding valuable information that would benefit someone else. I read an article describing 2 types of magician shadows, so breaking it down even further. The detached manipulator, which is a perpetrator. They control others by withholding information or by telling half-truths. They are cold and calculating, cynical and soulless. And there is a link to that article below. Then there's the denying innocent one. Passive shadow. Helpless victim. Believes they are a good person. They fear others will discover their lifelessness and lack of responsibility. Also here, we clearly see the wizard hide behind the curtain so others won't truly see him. It's a perfect metaphor. So what does the magician mean in the tarot? As a master manifester, the magician brings you the tools, resources, and energy you need to make your dreams come true. The key to bringing these tools together synergistically so that the impact of what you create is greater than the separate parts. This is alchemy at its best. The seed of potential has sprouted and you're being called to take action and bring your intention to fruition. The skills, knowledge, and capabilities you have gathered along your life path have led you to where you are right now. So wow, Mr. Langley really pulled out all the stops in describing the magician archetype through Professor Marvel and the Wizard, in my opinion. Now, on to describing the other characters through the tarot. The way I see it, the Scarecrow is the Hanged Man, card 12. The Hanged Man card shows a man suspended upside down, viewing the world from a completely different perspective. It is the card or archetype of ultimate surrender, of being suspended in time, and of martyrdom and sacrifice to the greater good. But it can also mean being stuck in a place or perspective. However, our Scarecrow isn't upside down. So, the reverse interpretation of the card may be a positive sign that you can now move forward with a new perspective and a renewed sense of energy. There may have been a breakthrough about how you need to do things differently. You are prepared to make those changes and move ahead with a new mindset. I do think this matches up pretty well to his job as a real-life Scarecrow. He's guarding the crops. He's got a job to do that means ultimate sacrifice since he is pinned up to a pole. But in the movie, the Scarecrow feels stuck and like he's not really doing such a great job keeping the crows away because he isn't very smart. How can we match this up to how Dorothy was living her life in Kansas? She definitely felt stuck in her place on the farm, but she also was stuck in her perspective. The card exemplifies Dorothy's new beginnings on the Yellow Brick Road, the place where she will need to be open to a change in perspective and be open to the sacrifice she will ultimately need to be willing to give by journeying into the unknown. The character is showing her and us that it doesn't take brains to have a change in perspective. It takes willingness to be open to other. He needs to see the world from a different perspective to gain understanding or enlightenment. The hangman is asking one to surrender and let go of investing in specific outcomes or resisting your current circumstances. Accept them and allow yourself to flow with life on another level. You were being called to change your perspective and your energy and find that separating yourself from your everyday life is helpful, whether it's going for a walk in nature, going on a retreat, or watching Yellow Brick Road Rash, so you can start to shift your energy and flow more frequently again. Okay, the Tin Man, I am pairing with Temperance, card 14. Now I'm going out on a limb here. Temperance is the card for bringing balance, patience, and moderation. You're being invited to stabilize your energy and allow the life force to flow through you without force, reactivity, or resistance. It's time to recover your flow and get your life back in order for you to remain calm, even when life feels stressful or frantic. You need an even temperament to manage your emotions. Take a balanced and moderate approach, including others in bringing together a diverse group of people with harmony and cooperation by working together. This will collectively leverage the right talents, experiences, abilities, and skills. There is alchemy within Temperance. This tarot card is about blending. He may not have a heart, but he has empathy and compassion. However, he is over-emotional, which causes him to rust and freeze up. Fight, flight, freeze response? His gift of compassion is also his weakness, though. Is part of the message the fact that he needs to set emotional boundaries for himself? Are worries about everyone else to his own detriment? He isn't in flow, and his tears make him freeze. We can already see the parallels with Dorothy's reactivity in the movie, but her fight, flight, freeze mechanism did lean more towards flight, as she wanted to run away. I think the Tin Man and Dorothy are learning about temperance, and she helps him overcome his freeze response by giving him oil representing lifeblood flow and ultimately self-care. That's cool. Okay, the lion I am calling Strength for now. Oh my gosh, this was a hard one. Obviously, the Strength card was a contender because the object being tamed by the woman in the card is a lion. But then the King of the Forest is also an emperor, which hints to that card, but then there is Judgment. Stick with me here. Take a good look at the card, Judgment, and think about what you see. Take a screenshot if you need to. In fact, screenshot all of these for studying. And if you find any of this interesting, it would be a good idea to buy a Rider-Waite deck for yourself. They aren't expensive at all, and this deck has become pretty foundational as the go-to deck since the 1900s, early 1900s. BiddyTarot.com says, Judgment pops up in a tarot reading when you are close to reaching a significant stage in your journey. You have reviewed and evaluated your past experiences and have learned from them. All the pieces of the puzzle of your life are finally coming together to form one unified picture of your life story. This integration has healed deep wounds, and you are now able to put the past behind you. You have found your absolution, having cleared any wrongdoings or regrets and releasing any guilt or sadness about the past. This purging process will leave you refreshed and ready to take on any new challenges. The Judgment card suggests that you may find comfort in sharing your struggles with others within a group environment. Ding, ding, ding. There will be others who have experienced something similar and who can show you the way to freedom from your troubles. Let them guide you and help you. Rise together. I kid you not, this was the interpretation on the website, Biddy Tarot. Pretty uncanny, don't you think? I do. So we can see how the Judgment card ties its meaning to Dorothy's journey, but does the lion tie in? As Biddy Tarot says, there is an association between instinct and intellect that is drawn here, which is clearly in line with the lion's struggles. His intelligence gets in the way of him acting out what is instinctive, which for a lion is pretty problematic. But for Dorothy, it is a sign that she is learning to discern between what is danger and what is just something new or other to be explored. I have gone into a discussion of other in a previous episode, so I'm not going to go into it here. But let's just say it was and is pretty key to the whole journey. The lion comes along in the story just at the time when she has already learned so much about herself, and she has alchemized the dualities that existed between what was her true self and what were archetypes that were out of balance. Through kindness and compassion and acceptance of herself and other along the way, she was able to make peace with the aspects of herself for the good of the whole. I feel like what is equally as important as what card works here is when this character or archetype was brought on the scene. By the time she meets the lion, she has already met her first and second shadow, her daimon, the munchkins, which may represent the plethora of lesser, more juvenile archetypes that exist in her psyche, all of them innocent and sweet, but rather vulnerable. Then she came across the Scarecrow, representing her need to change her perspective, and the Tin Man, showing her she needed to self-regulate and moderate her emotions. So by the time she meets the lion, she is well on her way to fulfilling her destiny of individuation and enlightenment. I'm calling Dorothy the Fool card, but is the Fool a hero archetype? Maybe she starts out as the fool and then becomes the hero. We spoke about this card in the last episode, so I won't go over it here, but I will say that the dog or Toto is significant. He represents instinct or intuition, and the only thing the fool presumably has to help him traverse the unknown path successfully. Let's talk about those slippers, though. I mean, they're so important, right? It may surprise you to learn they weren't red in the original story. I find that interesting. With a change in color that was surely just focused on being more eye-catching, I can't help but think the edit might have been more intentional and had some deeper associations that could be made. But even if not, I'm going to take creative license and draw my own conclusions. I think the slippers may symbolize the torch. You know, like pass the torch or torch bearer. And Dorothy becomes that archetypal torch bearer when Glinda puts her shoes on her feet. I had to look up the definition of the phrase, though. A torchbearer is the one who brings enlightenment or truth, and Dorothy is definitely on that journey, so it tracks. Kind of appropriate that the Paris Games have been in the cultural forefront for the past few weeks. There was old Snoop carrying the torch. Gosh, I love that. I love that guy. What then does pass the torch mean here? The phrase refers to relinquishing knowledge or responsibility to another. It was presumably intended that the witch's shoes would belong to her sister upon passing, but the magic was usurped by Glinda when the shoes were given to Dorothy. So the transfer of power, aka knowledge, from the first witch to the second was broken by Glinda on behalf of Dorothy. But the torch was passed. Hold on. I think what was actually being transferred from the first witch to Dorothy was the torch, but we can also call that light or life. Those sparkling ruby red slippers are symbolic of the flame that burns within. The shoes represent the Dorothy who is whole and whose shadow archetype is now in balance. She has a newfound glow and sense of control of self, now truly ready for the adventure ahead. And we can draw a conclusion that the shoes are represented by the Sun card in the deck. The Sun card advises you to have confidence in your natural divinity. Throw off any cultural conditioning that keeps you from being authentic with yourself and stepping into the full light of who you are, so you no longer give away power to the people that criticize and shame you. Step into the light of truth. That's from tarot.com. So moving forward, we need to be thinking about the characters in the movie, not only at face value for their roles on the journey to Oz, but also in regards to what they mean as a part of Dorothy, because they are a reflection of her. To tie this thought experiment up, it is important to bring up one more thing. If the waking world and the dreaming world represent the same process, an experience to be interpreted, then what does that mean really to our waking lives? What does it mean about the stories we tell ourselves about how we see people in our lives every single day? And what value can we place on analyzing those stories? And what do aliens have to do with any of it? In my next episode, I'm going to point you in the direction of a couple of very influential podcasts that have really fed me some nutritious nuggets as I took another step down this yellow brick road. I'm pretty sure if you stay with me here, you will begin to have your mind melted as we go even deeper into the realm of other to a point of convergence. If you've gotten this far and are enjoying the journey, then please subscribe, like, and share. It is so critical to the success of this channel and every channel. And it is the only way the algorithm knows to share this journey with new seekers here on YouTube. Plus, I would appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. Until next time, peace out.